"Is this some kind of sick joke?" the man in the expensive suit barked, slamming his hand onto the formica table hard enough to make the silverware jump. The sound cut through the low hum of conversation in the diner like a gunshot. Every head turned. In the center of the storm stood a young waitress, her hands trembling so violently that the coffee pot she held rattled against the rim of a ceramic mug. She looked to be no older than 19, tears already welling in her wide, terrified eyes. Paul Underwood, 84 years old and wearing a faded shirt that had seen better decades, did not turn his head immediately. He kept his eyes on the plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. Across from him, his 10-year-old granddaughter Sarah stopped chewing her toast. Her eyes darted from the shouting man to her grandfather's weathered face. "You spilled a drop on my cuff, you incompetent little girl," the man sneered, standing up to tower over the waitress. His suit was sharp, navy blue, tailored to fit a frame that suggested he spent more time at a country club than a gym. He pointed a manicured finger in her face. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? It costs more than you make in 6 months. I should have your manager fire you on the spot." "I am so sorry, sir," the waitress stammered, clutching a rag, trying to dab at the table, but he swatted her hand away. "Don't touch me," he hissed. "Just get out of my face. I want the manager." Now, the diner fell into that uncomfortable, heavy silence where everyone watches but no one moves. People shifted in their booths, averting their eyes, afraid to draw the ire of a man who clearly wielded his anger like a weapon. Sarah reached across the table. Her small hand covered Paul's knuckles, which were swollen with arthritis and mapped with the blue veins of age. She squeezed his hand. "Grandad," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "Please help her." Paul slowly set his fork down. He chewed his bite of eggs methodically, swallowed, and then took a sip of his black coffee. He looked at Sarah. Her eyes were pleading. She knew him only as the man who snored in the recliner and grew prize-winning tomatoes, but she also knew that he didn't like bullies. Paul took a napkin, wiped his mouth, and slowly slid out of the booth. His movements were stiff, the legacy of old injuries and simple time. He didn't march. He shuffled slightly, his back slightly bent, looking every bit the fragile octogenarian. He approached the man's table. The angry customer was still berating the girl, who was now openly crying. "Excuse me, son," Paul said. His voice wasn't loud. It was the texture of gravel crunching under a boot, rough, low, and steady. The man in the suit spun around, his face flushed with rage. He looked down at Paul, scanning the shirt, the worn work pants, and the cane Paul hadn't even bothered to bring with him from the booth. The man's lip curled. "Excuse me, who are you, the ghost of Christmas past?" "Mind your own business, old man." "She said she was sorry," Paul said, his tone unchanging. "Accidents happen. There is no need to humiliate the child." The man laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Humiliate? I'm teaching her a lesson about competence, something you probably forgot years ago when you went senile. Go sit down and eat your soft food before I buy this place and kick you out too." Paul didn't blink. He stood his ground, blocking the man's view of the waitress. "I am asking you nicely. Sit down. Finish your meal. Leave the girl alone." The man took a step closer, invading Paul's personal space. He was a foot taller and 40 years younger. "You're asking me? Or what? What are you going to do, Grandpa? Hit me with your walker?" The manager, a balding man sweating through his shirt, rushed over, looking panicked. "Mr. Henderson, please, is everything all right?" "No, it is not all right," Henderson spat, gesturing at Paul. "This geriatric vagrant is harassing me while I'm trying to discipline your incompetent staff. I want him removed, and I want her fired, or I'm calling the police and my lawyer." The manager looked at Paul, then at Henderson. He did the math of commerce, not morality. "Sir," he said to Paul, wringing his hands, "please, just go back to your seat. I can't have a disturbance here." "There was already a disturbance," Paul said calmly. "I'm just trying to end it." "I'm calling the cops," Henderson announced, pulling a sleek smartphone from his pocket. He glared at Paul with a triumphant smirk. "You're done, old man. You want to play hero? Let's see how you handle a trespassing charge." Paul didn't move. He didn't retreat. He just watched Henderson dial, his face an unreadable mask of calm amidst the rising chaos. Sarah watched from the booth, her hands clasped over her mouth, terrified that she had sent her grandfather into a battle he couldn't win. The minutes that followed were a slow-motion train wreck of social pressure. Henderson stayed on the phone, his voice booming as he described a violent, crazy old man threatening him. The manager tried to usher the weeping waitress into the kitchen, muttering apologies to Henderson. The other diners whispered, some pulling out their phones to record, hungry for content but unwilling to intervene. Paul stood like a statue. He didn't shout back. He didn't try to explain himself to the room. He simply waited. His left hand rested in his pocket, fingers brushing against the smooth, cold surface of a coin he had carried for 50 years. It was a habit, a grounding mechanism. Whenever the world got loud, whenever the adrenaline tried to spike, he touched the metal. The sensation of the coin triggered a micro-flash of memory, sharp and bright, a jungle canopy blocking out the sun, the smell of wet earth and copper, a young man, barely 20, pressing the coin into Paul's palm. "Get this back to her, Paul. Promise me." The weight of the promise was heavier than the coin. Paul's thumb traced the worn edge of the metal in his pocket. It was a reminder that he had stood against things far more terrifying than a rude man in a tailored suit. The sirens cut through the tension. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb outside, lights flashing blue and red against the diner windows. Henderson smiled, a cruel, predatory expression. "Here we go," Henderson said. "Goodbye, Grandpa." 2 officers walked in. One was older, looking tired. The other was young, fit, and looked eager for action. Henderson immediately intercepted them, putting on a mask of victimhood. "Officers, thank God." He pointed a shaking finger at Paul. "That man there. He's confused. He's aggressive. He threatened to assault me because I complained about my service. I don't feel safe." The younger officer, Officer Miller, stepped toward Paul, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "Sir, I need you to step outside. Now." Paul looked at the officer. "I haven't done anything, son. I'm finishing my breakfast with my granddaughter. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way," Miller said, his voice rising. "The man says you threatened him. Given your state, we need to separate you. Step outside." Sarah ran from the booth and hugged Paul's leg. "He didn't do anything." That man was screaming at Jenny. Miller looked annoyed. "Miss, go sit down." "Sir, if you don't move, I'm going to have to assist you." At the back of the diner, in a corner booth half obscured by a hanging plant, a man in a gray hoodie had been watching the entire exchange. He hadn't looked up from his laptop until Paul stood up. Now he was staring intently at Paul. He squinted, looking at the way Paul stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight perfectly balanced, hands open and relaxed but ready. It was a stance that wasn't taught in nursing homes. The man in the hoodie closed his laptop. He saw the coin Paul had briefly manipulated in his hand before the police arrived. He saw the distinct, jagged scar that ran down the side of Paul's neck, visible only when he turned his head a certain way. The man in the hoodie pulled out his phone. He didn't dial 911. He dialed a number that didn't have a standard area code. "Yeah, it's Chief Davis," he whispered into the phone, keeping his voice low. "I'm at the Denny's on 4th. You're not going to believe this, but I think Viper is here." "Yes, the Viper. He's being jammed up by some local PD in a suit. It's about to go south. I need a verify on Paul Underwood." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Understood," Davis said. "Yeah, he's gray. He's old. But it's him." "Okay, send it." Davis hung up. He didn't intervene yet. He knew that help had to come from the top to stop what was happening. He watched as the officers grabbed Paul's arms. "Don't touch me," Paul said quietly. "Stop resisting," Miller shouted, twisting Paul's arm behind his back. "I'm not resisting," Paul said, wincing as the arthritis flared in his shoulder. "I'm asking you to listen." In a sterile office 30 miles away, a red light blinked on a secure console. A focused aide picked up the receiver, listened for 3 seconds, and then went pale. She slammed the phone down and sprinted down the hallway, bypassing 2 secretaries and bursting into a briefing room. Admiral Vance, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, was in the middle of discussing budget allocations. He frowned as the aide burst in. "This better be good, Lieutenant." "Sir," the aide breathed, her chest heaving. "We have a code black gold, confirmed sighting. It's Underwood." The room, filled with high-ranking officers, went deadly silent. Admiral Vance stood up slowly. The budget papers slid off his lap and scattered on the floor. "Paul Underwood?" Vance asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir. Local police are arresting him in a diner in Charleston. A witness called it in." Vance didn't ask another question. "Get the car. Get the detail. Call the base commander at Charleston and tell them if they let that man spend 1 second in a holding cell, I will strip every stripe off every uniform in that precinct. We move." Now, back at the diner, the humiliation was peaking. Henderson was filming on his phone, narrating the scene for his future social media post. "See, folks? This is what happens when you don't respect your betters. The police are taking out the trash." Officer Miller had handcuffs on Paul now. The metal clicked shut, biting into the thin skin of Paul's wrists. Sarah was screaming, crying, being held back by the older officer who looked sympathetic, but resigned to following his partner's lead. "You're making a mistake," Paul said, his head bowed. "Not for me, but for you." "Shut up," Miller said, shoving Paul toward the door. "You have the right to remain silent, so use it." They pushed him out the glass double doors into the bright morning sunlight. A small crowd had gathered in the parking lot, drawn by the lights. Henderson followed them out, still filming, laughing. "Make sure you get his mugshot. I want a copy," Henderson yelled. They were halfway to the squad car when the sound began. It wasn't a siren. It was a low thrumming, a vibration that shook the asphalt. It grew louder, a rhythmic thwup 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 that echoed off the nearby buildings. Then came the SUVs. Not police cruisers. Black, government-issue SUVs with tinted windows and federal plates. They didn't pull up, they swarmed. 4 of them screeched into the parking lot, blocking the exits, boxing in the police cars. Officer Miller froze, his hand dropping to his holster. What the hell? The doors of the SUVs flew open before the wheels had even stopped rolling. Men in fatigues spilled out, not standard infantry, but the kind of serious bearded men who moved with lethal efficiency. They didn't point weapons, but their presence alone was a threat. They formed a perimeter instantly. Then a sleek black sedan pulled up through the gap the SUVs had created. The driver hopped out and opened the rear door. Admiral Vance stepped out. He was in his full dress whites, medals stacked from his chest to his shoulder, gold braiding gleaming in the sun. He put his cover on his head, adjusted the brim, and walked straight toward the 2 police officers. Officer Miller's mouth fell open. He looked from the black SUVs to the Admiral, his brain failing to process the escalation. Henderson lowered his phone, his smirk vanishing. "Who is this?" he muttered. Admiral Vance stopped 3 feet from Officer Miller. He didn't look at Miller. He looked straight at the handcuffed old man. Vance's face was made of stone, but his eyes were shining. He snapped his heels together and threw a salute so crisp it seemed to cut the air. He held it. One by one, the men in fatigues, operators who had seen things most people only see in movies, snapped to attention and saluted. Paul Underwood stood there, handcuffs behind his back, shirt rumpled. He sighed, a long, weary exhale. He straightened his back, ignoring the pain. He nodded once. "At ease, gentlemen," Paul said softly. Vance dropped the salute. He turned his gaze to Officer Miller. The Admiral's voice was low, terrifyingly calm. "Officer, you are currently detaining Master Chief Petty Officer Paul Underwood. You have exactly 3 seconds to remove those restraints before I have you arrested for treason against a national treasure." Miller's hands shook so badly he dropped the key twice before he managed to unlock the cuffs. Paul rubbed his wrists. Henderson, realizing the tide had turned but too arrogant to accept it, stepped forward. "Now wait a minute. I don't care who his drinking buddies are. That man assaulted me. I'm a taxpayer." Vance turned on his heel. He didn't shout. He just looked at Henderson with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something stuck to the bottom of a boot. Chief Davis, the man from the booth, stepped out of the diner now, flashing a badge. He walked up to Henderson. "Sir, we have witness testimony, mine, that you initiated a confrontation, filed a false police report, and disturbed the peace." Henderson spluttered. "False report?" He was menacing. Vance stepped closer to Henderson, invading his space just as Henderson had done to Paul. "You have no idea what menacing is, son," Vance said. "The man standing there is the reason you get to wear that suit and scream at teenage girls. You are looking at the architect of Operation Silent Thunder. You are looking at a man who swam 3 miles in hostile waters with a bullet in his lung to save his squad. He has been awarded the Navy Cross. Twice. He is a quiet professional. And you are a loud mistake." Vance turned to the police sergeant who had just arrived on the scene. "Sergeant, I want this man removed. If he isn't charged with filing a false report within the hour, I will be calling the governor. Do we understand each other?" "Crystal clear, Admiral," the sergeant said, glaring at Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, you're coming with us." As Henderson was led away, protesting weakly, the crowd that had gathered erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite applause of a golf tournament. It was cheers, whistles, and claps. Sarah ran to Paul, burying her face in his stomach. Paul patted her hair with his trembling hand. "It's okay, sweetie. It's okay." Admiral Vance walked up to Paul. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered a hug. The 2 men embraced, the pristine white uniform pressing against the dirty shirt. "We thought we lost you, Paul," Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. "You went off the grid. I just wanted some peace, Thomas," Paul replied, using the Admiral's first name. "Just wanted to grow my tomatoes." "You can't hide forever, Viper," Vance smiled, pulling back. Paul looked at the young waitress, Jenny, who was standing in the doorway of the diner, still clutching her rag, looking stunned. Paul walked over to her, the Admiral trailing him. Paul reached into his pocket and pulled out the coin. He held it out to her. "You did a good job today, miss," Paul said. "You kept your dignity. That's harder than fighting." He pressed the coin into her hand. It was a heavy bronze medallion. On one side was a trident, on the other an inscription in Latin. "Keep this," Paul said. "When you feel scared, or when someone tries to make you feel small, you hold that, and you remember that you have friends in high places." Jenny looked at the coin, then at Paul. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Paul turned back to Vance. "Thomas, I appreciate the ride, but I have a breakfast to finish, and my granddaughter is still hungry." Vance laughed. "I'll buy." The scene inside the diner was different now. When Paul walked back in, the silence wasn't heavy or fearful. It was reverent. The manager personally wiped down their table. As they sat, Vance took the booth opposite them. He looked at Paul, then at Sarah. "Does she know?" Vance asked. "Know what?" Sarah asked, looking between them. Paul sighed. "She knows I'm her granddad. That's all she needs to know." Vance leaned forward. "Sarah, your grandfather is a legend. He did things that can't be written down in books yet. But the most important thing he ever did was teach us that strength isn't about how loud you can yell. It's about what you do when everyone else is freezing up." Sarah looked at Paul. He was just buttering a new piece of toast, his eyes focused on the bread, shying away from the praise. "He's just Grandad," she said fiercely. Paul smiled, a genuine crinkle-eyed smile. "That's the best rank I ever held." Suddenly, Paul's hand stopped. He looked at the Admiral. "Thomas, that boy, the police officer, Miller." Vance's face hardened. "He's done. I'll have his badge." "No," Paul said firmly. Vance blinked. "Excuse me?" "He's young," Paul said. "He's arrogant. He made a mistake. But if you take his badge, he learns nothing but bitterness. If you leave him and you teach him, maybe he becomes the officer he's supposed to be." Vance shook his head. "You're softer than you used to be, Paul." "Maybe," Paul said. "Or maybe I just know that throwing people away doesn't fix them." Vance nodded slowly. "I'll have a talk with his captain. He's going to be scrubbing patrol cars for a year, but he keeps the badge on your orders." The image of the coin in Jenny's hand flashed in Paul's mind again. The memory attached to it wasn't of combat but of a moment after. A young soldier panicked, breaking down after a firefight. Paul hadn't yelled at him. He hadn't relieved him of duty. He had given him that coin, told him to breathe, and sat with him until the shaking stopped. That soldier had gone on to save 3 lives the next week. Strength was in the recovery, not just the victory. The meal finished, and the spectacle wound down. The black SUVs dispersed, leaving only one to take the Admiral back to base. The police cars left, Henderson in the back of one, looking small and defeated. Paul and Sarah walked out of the diner. The sun was high now. "Can we go get ice cream?" Sarah asked, holding his hand. Paul checked his watch. "It's 10 a.m. "So?" Sarah grinned. "So?" Paul chuckled. "Chocolate or vanilla?" As they walked toward Paul's beat-up pickup truck, Officer Miller was standing by his squad car. He looked stripped down, humbled. He saw Paul coming, and straightened up. He looked like he wanted to speak but didn't know the words. Paul stopped. He looked the young man in the eye. "Protect them, son," Paul said. "That's the job, not the law. The people." Miller swallowed hard. He nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir." Paul nodded. "Be better tomorrow." Paul helped Sarah into the truck. He climbed into the driver's seat, the springs groaning under his weight. He started the engine, and it sputtered to life. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he looked in the rearview mirror. Jenny was standing at the window, holding the coin up against the glass. Paul smiled, shifted gears, and drove his granddaughter to get ice cream. The Admiral was right about the past, but Paul knew the truth. The battle for decency was fought every single day, in diners, in parking lots, and in the quiet moments where you choose to stand up. And today, the good guys had won. In the weeks that followed, the incident at the diner rippled outward, though not in the way Henderson had intended with his viral video. The footage of the Admiral's salute was leaked, not by Henderson, but by another patron. It didn't go viral for the drama. It went viral for the silence. The image of the stoic old man in a shirt, surrounded by the highest military brass, struck a chord. The local police department issued a formal apology. More importantly, the chief implemented a mandatory training program on de-escalation and veteran interactions, with a curriculum designed in consultation with Chief Davis. Officer Miller was indeed assigned to desk duty and vehicle maintenance for 6 months, but he requested to sit in on the training sessions. He kept a picture of the salute taped to his locker, not as a souvenir but as a warning. Henderson's lawsuit against the diner was dismissed with prejudice, and his reputation in the local business community evaporated as the story of his behavior spread. He moved 2 towns over a month later, but the most profound change happened at the diner itself. Jenny didn't quit. She framed the coin Paul had given her and kept it behind the counter, right next to the register. It became a talisman for the staff. When customers got rude, when the rush got overwhelming, they would look at the coin. It reminded them that dignity wasn't something a customer could pay for or take away. Paul continued to come in every Tuesday for eggs and coffee. He never sat in a special booth, and he refused to let the manager comp his meal, though they always added an extra strip of bacon. He remained the quiet man in the shirt. One Tuesday, a few months later, a young man in a Navy uniform walked into the diner. He looked nervous, his white hat clutched in his hands. He scanned the room until he saw Paul. He walked over, hesitating. Paul looked up from his newspaper. "Mr. Underwood?" the sailor asked. Paul nodded. "Just Paul, son." The sailor swallowed. Basic training was hard, and I was thinking about quitting, but then I saw you standing there, and I thought if he can do that, I can do this." Paul gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Sit down, son." The sailor sat. "You scared?" Paul asked. "Terrified, sir." "Good," Paul said. "Fear keeps you sharp. It's what you do with it that matters." Paul talked to the boy for an hour. He didn't tell war stories of glory. He talked about dry socks, about trusting your swim buddy, about the importance of writing letters home. When the sailor left, he walked taller. Sarah, who had joined them halfway through after school, watched the sailor leave. "You're doing it again," she said, dipping a fry in ketchup. "Doing what?" Paul asked innocently. "Being a hero," she said. Paul wiped his mouth with a napkin. "I'm just eating lunch, kiddo." He wasn't just eating lunch. He was holding the line. He was the quiet guardian who had traded a rifle for wisdom, but who would still stand up when the world tried to push the innocent down. He was Paul Underwood, the unassuming hero, and for the people in that town, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story of justice and honor, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that true strength is often quiet. Don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories for more tales of our heroes.